Well, welcome everybody. We're doing something a little bit special today. We're going to have a very kind of strategic conversation, I think is probably the best way to put it, with one of our partners from Rivers Are Life, John Holm. He's the VP of Strategic Initiative at Pyxera Global. John, how you doing today, man?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
For those of you that don't know me, my name's Chris Keefer. I'm the CEO at BeAlive, the studio that kind of helped bring all this together from a content standpoint, and the film Keepers of the North. So it's been an incredible initiative and amazing to work with a group like Pyxera Global. I think the best way to do this is to start off and just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of the background and your role at Pyxera Global.
I've been involved with the nonprofit sector, got into it about 12 years ago after spending some time in the private sector, seeing how businesses operate and spending some time abroad in Hungary and Romania, launching, I think businesses for brands like, Subway, and helping IKEA make market entry, and just really fell in love with the intersection of community and business, and saw that, with companies, when they invest in social problems to make money, they solve a social problem really quick, really fast, and really fell in love with that idea of businesses solving problems through revenue generation. And so came to Pyxera Global, been here now 6 years, and really love the focus that we have in our mandate that we really have to do of aligning the public, private, and social sectors together to solve what we say solvable problems, one community at a time.
So the mission of Pyxera Global is just that, right? It's solving those problems. That's a pretty big problem to solve.
It's a pretty big mandate, right? I mean, I think what's unique about it is, kind of the systems change approach, which we really bring in. And a lot of my time is spent for the past 5 years in circular economy space and looking at the circular economy not as recycling and not as packaging, much broader, more of an economic transition to what we say a regenerative and equitable one. And really thinking through those lines of regeneration and thinking through, when we talk about the voice of reduce and reuse and repurpose, it's an honor to be able to do this work and work with such great people and across the board, all the way from the private to the social to the government sectors in this type of change.
It blew my mind as we're going to bring this many partners together in Alaska for this Keepers of the North film that we put together. But it really is. It's an initiative. I mean, this is something that is going to continue to go and push forward. And I think it's pretty incredible what's been done up to this point. And that's what intrigued me about it.
And we spend our time from the very beginning partnering with groups like First Mile, who's the soul of our work, or Metabolic, who helps bring the science to our efforts and thinking through. It's always a we, it's never an I, never just us. And I think that mindset of working across lines is, also it catches fire. Everyone gets excited about that. They want to be part of a bigger collective. And I think with the circular economy, its essence is collective change. Its essence is circular and sharing. So, we just really lean into that in our space and try to check our ego at the door and just try to bring in those groups and shine a light on the groups that are doing the best work, similar to what you're doing this documentary, right? It's kind of the same process, just different ends of the spigot. So I think, the whole idea with Alaska, it really was something really unique and transformative, and we're just happy to be here.
Well, I think that it aligns so perfectly with Rivers Are Life and the initiative that we're going out to do here, and it really is about progress over perfection, and this is about progress. This is that story of progress, and when I first heard about it, I thought that this is bold, but I loved it, and I think everybody at Rivers Are Life was very intrigued to see how this was going to come together. How did you guys kind of first come to understand the waste management issue in Alaska specifically?
We kind of said, how do we look at what waste means on the ground to these people? Not us determining what the waste is, but taking the pulse through a different lens, their lens, and then they identify solutions, which we as an organization help convene to scale. Because without local buy-in, it never works. We can't just copy and paste a process. And so I think where Alaska became really fascinating is that we, in full disclosure, took a leap of faith. We saw that one of our partners that we met really recommended Alaska because of the high incineration rates of waste and the lack of landfills, the lack of waste management infrastructure. And as our organization, we've been around for 30 years. We've operated over 110 countries. We're used to working in spaces that are really uncomfortable, which don't have the technology needed. So we thought, well, wait a second. There's an intersection here that we really need to explore. And so that's kind of how it came to be was, 1, there's a waste management problem. 2, Alaska's massive. And then 3, which was fascinating, which we can get into a little bit later. I want to kind of bury the lead. The waste that rolls up on Alaska shorelines is nothing that we've seen anywhere in the world. And so it was kind of those three things together where we said, hey, we're on to something.
When you talk about being local and getting the support, I think this film doesn't happen if it's not for the Gulf of Alaska Keeper and Chris Pallister. That organization, we call it Go AK. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Go AK is Gulf of Alaska Keeper. What an incredible human being and what he's doing in Alaska. And I think we have to stop for a minute and just give him his credit. Maybe tell us a little bit about your first meeting with him or your initiative of like, look at this guy and what he's doing in Alaska.
Without Chris, this is nothing. Doesn't happen. Chris has been doing this for over 20 years in some of the worst, hardest conditions. And he never asked for a spotlight. He never asked for he has no ego. He is a thoughtful environmentalist builder from Montana who had an idea and said, to hell with it. I'm just going to go do it because nobody's doing it. And so, when you meet Chris, it's pure. Like, he is the ideal state in many ways of what the world needs to do to look at solving problems. And I think he really encapsulates the Alaskan spirit really well. Communal, but independent. Thoughtful, but rugged as hell. And I think for us, without Chris, there's no project. We know that. Now, how we found Chris was stalking. Like, let's just call it out. Like, what happened was we went up there and we didn't get the hypotheses right. And we were really trying to figure ourselves out. And we just started reading and we saw all this stuff and then came upon a couple of internet articles and then saw this paper. And I was like, I'm done. I'm going to go literally track him down. Went through a bunch of processes and found his phone number and then left 3 messages. And finally, he responded, I think kind of tell me off, but then he heard what we were doing. He goes, well, gosh darn it, this could actually work. Yeah. And so that's how it began. And like any good relationship, it's not preconceived. I'm going to go meet this person and knock on their door. And it just happened. But Chris is really interesting because Chris and my family are all from Montana. We grew up, our family's 45 minutes apart. And we're all 4th generation Montanans. So you have these Montanans whose family knows each other, who cold call each other. One's in DC and the one's out there. And it was like, okay, wait a second. So it was really interesting how this moved forward. And so, without Chris, this doesn't happen. And on top of that, I would say that, Chris's connections to the recycling community, to the political community, to every community has been just entrenched. And so, when you work and you get paid to help lift him up, you're just a happy person when you're going to work and your job is to help make Go AK look good because it does it for itself and you're just happy that it's getting out there.
And I think it's serendipitous. It all comes together. And then to your point, he was very skeptical in the beginning about this. I think he was like, until he talked to you and said, this could work. This could really work. And I'm going to need your help. And I think that's where Pyxera Global came in, is now getting to work and saying, it's time to figure out how we're going to do this. And what partners do we need to bring in for that? That was such a huge part of this.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I think one piece that just has to go completely recognized is there's Chris Pallister and there's a group called First Mile. And First Mile has been working with Pyxera Global multiple geographies. We're working with some of the most distraught and stretched waste management systems in the world, and then converting and looking at waste solutions and putting those people on the ground who are most affected by it at the top of that economic value hill. And so we brought them along with us. And again, in the context of it's a collective, the soul, right? They came in and brought their insights to Alaska. When we first got there, it was just this, it's like you're lower 48, you're foreigners, you don't belong, right? Get the heck out of there. Yeah. And I remember Chris just validating, like without Chris's validation, people like, you're just going to come in and leave. And this is where dreams come to die. Get out of here. Like, no. So I think, when the partners came together, I think one thing that's really interesting, Chris, is that we came in, and that's what I think what our superpower was looking at high level system change, that you have to look at Alaska in 3 parts. One, you have the ocean. You have more square miles of beach in Alaska than the lower 48 combined. You have more waste sitting there with no landfills, just sitting and leaching on tribal land, by the way, with no economic value to take that waste out of it. And so what Chris has done is pick that up. But see, what's missing is Chris picks it up. Chris was taking that himself as a nonprofit and paying money on the ground to go dispose of it in Tacoma. So what we said coming in with First Mile was, let's convene a bigger solution. Let's build a recycling solution around this that can work at scale for local Alaskans owned by Alaskans. And so that's kind of the idea of what we've created.
Well, it's incredible. And this was a way to kind of test that theory, really. I mean, it was a matter of like, if this works, there are ways to go forward. There are ways to work with the state of Alaska. There are ways to work with organizations and companies to, put this solution in place. So this goes back to that kind of progress over perfection. This was something that we had to do, that you guys had to do, to say, let's make sure it can work. And the outcome has been absolutely incredible as far as what has been done so far.
Yeah, absolutely it has. I mean, it's inspiring. And I think just on the video alone, I think it doesn't do it justice, though, of the complexity of going up to some of those points and picking up that waste leakage. And the waste leakage is massive. Most of the waste is coming from tragic plastic. And what's fascinating about that waste is that it's not Alaskan waste. It's Japanese waste, and it's Taiwanese waste, and it's Korean waste, and it's Russian waste. Plastics that really don't have an economic value solution, not ones and twos, and no financial solution. And financial solution is clearly needed, because without a financial solution, there's no engagement of anybody wanting to do anything with it. So we can try to say it's lab tested. Lab does not matter. And so I think what we really tried to bring was a financial model for Alaskans to actually develop that infrastructure necessary to put shine the respective light on. And I will say this too. The communal nature of Alaskans and how they each take care of one another and how they consider one another. There's not the hard red and blue like we have here in the lower 48. There's a much more of a spirit. And I think, Chris really embodies that, and with the partners, with the work that he's doing. And also, I mean, now we're getting into the next phase of our project, which is kind of now, okay, let's systemize and actualize this. We're seeing that partnership come all the way through on the ground.
It's amazing that he was just doing that earlier, where he was going out on a ship in Ottawa Whittier out into these, rough seas to go get that, just because he wanted to get rid of it. And now the fact that there is this financial solution, maybe there's others that start to lean in. I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? Is lean in and say, I can go get that now.
But I mean, the amount of effort and thought that goes into this and science is nuts. And what's been interesting is he's brought, Net Your Life. There's so many other groups that have been associated with Chris early on doing this work. And so I think, what that shines out is just the expertise. And it's also a family. It's not just him. It's Eric and his sons and his other sons and really engaged on it. So, it's a transformative partnership all the way through and through.
Well, up until this point, just to kind of reiterate, we've identified, Pyxera identifies Alaska, and it says, okay, there's an issue. We know that. Then we go on a stalking mission to find a gentleman named Chris Pallister, who's doing incredible work. He greenlights it. He gives you that local clout that you need to get involved with organizations like First Mile. So where does Pyxera Global now take it, and the grants that were fostered to kind of get this thing done, the cleanups at Gore Point, working with outside organizations like Dow and the Alliance? Give us a sense of like what that step looks like and what's being done there.
Well, it's really exciting, because when you look at waste, to get enough feedstock to make something work around these tragic plastics, and plastic itself, is that you have to look at three geographies. You have to look at one, ocean and waste coming in from the ocean. That's what Chris and his team is working on. Two, you have to look at the municipalities within Anchorage itself to actually say we want to invest in recycling and invest in a system that actually we can look and harness those ones and twos and others to bring to scale in the model. And then three, backhaul. Now, backhaul is tribe. And it's hard to make an in being a white male with tribe. Full stop. Building that trust takes a long time. There's a group called Delta Backhaul, and I would be totally remiss not to highlight Delta Backhaul and the work that they are doing to develop an infrastructure of backhaul waste coming from tribal lands, building in structures to help procure that waste and then bring it into what we say is a reverse logistics hub. And so what we're doing is building a hub and spoke approach in Anchorage around those three areas. One, feedstock coming from Chris. Two, working on a backhaul community, working with tribe as partners to help bring in waste as an economic value into a hub in Anchorage. And then three, working with local city municipalities and infrastructure, which we've had really great conversations on, saying, we have a technology. So I'm burying the lead right now. We have a technology that actually can help solve some of this, where we can actually bring waste in and ship product out. And I think what's really important about this, and for people to understand about Alaska, it imports everything. The cost of building materials in Nome, Alaska is 8 times more expensive than it is in Seattle. There's an economic need of actually having waste stay and be converted to product there. And so there's a business case. And what we are doing, what we dived into, Chris, very on, our hypothesis was, let's actualize this business case. Now, we got the ocean with Chris proving it. We got to still work on building the trust with tribe. And now we have ins now with the cities and the recyclers and even up, and I have to say, both senator offices, both senators in Alaska have been so helpful in actually paying attention to what we're trying to do with Senators Murkowski and Sullivan. So really trying to think through what that looks like. And that's where we insert Dow and the Alliance on Plastic Waste. Dow came in and understood from the beginning that in order to have a plastic recycling system, you have to have a functional recycling system first. You can't just come in and plop something in and make it work when nothing else is working around it. And so, Dow's been a really key ally and partner with us on seeding this type of mindset from the very beginning.
You meet with Dow, you meet with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. They also had a big part in this and what they're trying to do with that organization. And I would imagine it's met with,
100%. I think the thing that's been really fascinating was 2 additional partners that we latched onto this, which was one in FedEx. FedEx, we've been working with for 2 years on reverse logistics and sustainable reverse logistics, and saying, what if we look where waste rolls up in historically marginalized community areas, and we are able to transport that waste and turn it into product to our hub and spoke model. And so we're looking at doing that in other geographies in the United States. And they got so geeked out by this idea of Alaska of doing, in-kind logistics support to help this project. And so they jumped on board. And that cascaded into the Alliance on Plastic Waste, where at first was, Alaska's kind of small, doesn't have much impact. We need to look at investments somewhere else. And then their heads turned around when they saw what was happening and said, wait a second, CRDC. And so they've been working with CRDC. And I think, I think when you look at the connections of one, how do you get the waste to a structure, to a hub? One, you have to have logistics, FedEx. And then 2, really looking at what is the technology that we can use to take the tragic plastics and turn it into a product for Alaskans and owned by Alaskans. And I think that's where it's been really exciting with the Alliance on Plastic Waste, is bringing that technology to us.
Now we've got it all and it's on the boat. Now what are we going to do with it? How are we going to get it to where it needs to go? And then FedEx raises their hand and says, we'll take care of that, which I thought was absolutely incredible. We take that to the CRDC and there's a big test there as well, right? Because this is ocean plastic. This is stuff that's a little bit harder to work with than normal. It's been out in the weather. It's been, all the things that happen to that. And that was kind of a concern, I think, in the beginning as well, is will this do what we think it'll do and hold up to it, right?
I mean, let's go at point A to point B to point C. Point A, Chris goes out with a crew, right? In some of the harshest conditions, and has to cancel even a week because the tide's coming in early. And we're talking waves. And this is not like, in a sandbox. This is like a massive wave. Gets the waste out with his crew, drops it off in Whittier. Enter FedEx to come in. FedEx transports that across the United States all the way to York, Pennsylvania, which is CRDC's U.S. facility. So we didn't have to take it to Costa Rica, thank God. From there, then the testing started happening. And what was fascinating about the testing, and I think what you guys do, and Chris, your team does really well, is you bring alive the difference of that shredding, the difference of the taking buoys, which just Chris says it better than anyone can say, that taking the hardest 4-letter word together and turning it and coming out. It's amazing. It's a miracle. And I think that's correct. I think that, what we see is that waste turning into concrete aggregate is something that's truly transcendent, and they were able to do such a good job with it. And so, we'll see what part 2 is going to bring up with that, but we're excited to see what the next steps are with it.
So I was going to ask you that. So what's your hopes in terms of global waste, plastic pollution in Alaska, and also just globally? Like what's your hopes there?
So when we look at the plastic crisis, one thing that we see in our work is that we want the longest lasting interventions possible to keep it from leaking out of the environment. We don't want it just to keep on being put back into our clothes, streaming out into the oceans and hurting and harming our environment. So when you hear us say plastic brick conversion, concrete aggregate like conversion? How can we look at renewable homes? How can we look at convex homes? How can we look at ways of taking this and getting back value, not just in Alaska, because there's a lot of need there, but in other geographies around the world where housing is an issue. We have climate refugees coming. So obviously you hear in my voice, we have bold ambitions of what we want this to be, but I think, that's our space. That's what we need to be doing. When you look at Alaska itself, we've got the largest recycler on the ground at the Port of Alaska in Anchorage, wanting to be the hub and putting together a model right now with CRC, and the group is called Central Recycling. And my God, they are primed and ready to where we can start bringing feedstock off the shelf and converting it into bricks. And, who knows what 2023 and 2024 can uphold, but I can tell you everyone around that ecosystem is geeked based on the letters of support we've received, and based upon also some of the grants we're already seeing line of sight on. So we're hoping to cross our fingers and get some news here in the January of getting us a nice pot of gold to start activating the work.
It truly is amazing how this has all come together. And I would say, what do you recommend for other companies that are basically in organizations that are trying to make a difference like Pyxera? What do you is there a recommendation for how do they get involved?
We very we specific in the sense that companies have an opportunity right now. If you look at Philips lighting, Philips doesn't sell light bulbs, they sell lighting as a service, right? They're incentivized to keep products in longer. They think through that and they work with ecosystem partners. The companies that we work with, like the FedExes, Dow here, is companies that really can understand that partnership mentality and get it. Companies that hide and trying to say, we're going to own this, keep our IP, not try to be a we, that's a problem. And that's going to have to start stretching out a little bit. And I would say for those nonprofits in our space, convening others and bringing others and highlighting the Chris's, again, we get cachet. We succeed when Chris succeeds. We succeed when First Mile succeeds. Our superpower is just the ones connecting the dots and then working with those community groups to lift lives up. So I would say a strong, healthy, collaborative we is probably the best answer I can give to your question.
And I think that's what sparked in the beginning with us as BeAlive and Dow to create a platform like Rivers Are Life. We know that there's a lot of unintended consequences right now. We didn't set out to do this. And so now we're trying to come back around and say, what's the best way to put these solutions in place? And for us, you mentioned earlier this feeling of upstream, onstream, and downstream. And it takes all parts of that to really make a difference. And I think, at Rivers Are Life, we're here to highlight people like Chris Pallister, engage with organizations like yourself at Pyxera Global and institutions, because I think there's a lot of ways that institutions can get involved and bring some of that education to this entire program. So again, it's an incredible project, John. I've had so much fun working on it. We're so excited that this thing is out in the public for people to see. We can't thank our planet advocates enough that have been involved in this entire program. And now we get to go, hopefully, make additional change in phase 2 of this and continue to grow. So maybe I'll leave you with this. How do individuals, we talked about companies, but how do individuals get involved? How can they become a we in this? Is there something specific that you can think of off the top of your head that would be, if you're thinking about being involved, do this?
I think if you have an itch, go scratch it, time short. And I think what Chris identified was he had a big itch. He saw a problem and he said, you know what, I'm just going to go do it. And I think when you look at the whole Rivers of Life platform, which you have a lot of people that are really good at just not sitting still. Everyone has a choice to make of which side they stand on right now. And I'm meaning that of looking at the world around us, be active in being a steward and a keeper of the planet and where we are. Don't hesitate. Just try. We can always dust each other off, but you got to do something. So just go make your mark.
Because we can all sit around and talk about the problem all day long. How are we going to find a solution? Let's all work together to do that. And that's exactly what happened here with Keepers of the North and all of our amazing partners. And I want to thank you specifically, John, for kind of bringing this to light with us at BeAlive and also at Rivers Are Life. And Dow, Pyxera Global, is doing incredible things with bold initiatives. And it takes companies like that in order to make action actually happen.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you to the team. Keep on doing a great job and look forward to continuing the narrative.
If you guys want to learn more about it, you can check us out at riversarelife.com. You can look at the social media and LinkedIn. Make sure to check out the film. It's on YouTube. Share it. Tell the world about it. We're happy about it.